Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Chav Zayin has two primary sugyas. The first one is the Gemara's search for the source that the skinning and cutting up of karbanos can be performed by a non-Kohen. The Gemara says it's derived from an extra place where it says that a Kohen has to do something else, and the teacher is only that he has to do, but not this. The Gemara will try to find which extra place exactly is the one we're referring to. And then the Gemara will discuss the performance of the avoda of arranging wood in the fire. What happens to a non-Kohen who does that? Is he chayav misa or not? So first of all, the Gemara begins, we're immediately following a Mishnah which says that the two steps, the skinning and cutting up of karbanos, those are allowed to be done by a zar. The Gemara says, what's the source for that? So the Gemara tries a number of sources, and we need to introduce it with a description of the psukim, the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, describing the steps that are involved in bringing karbanos. This is a private carbon being brought by Yisrael, and the psukim list the steps as follows. There's the leaning. The owner of the carbon leans his hand on his hand with his weight on the animal. It's called smicha. Then the animal is slaughtered. That's shchita. Then it talks about zrika, applying the blood to the mizbeach. Then it talks about hefshet v'nituach, that's skinning and cutting up. Then it talks about bringing a fire onto the mizbeach. Then it talks about arranging the wood in the fire. Then it talks about arranging the pieces of the animal on the fire. Then it talks about bringing the pieces to the fire, which actually it should be brought before, and then it talks about actually burning the pieces in the fire. These are all the steps that are listed, and on some of them the Torah says that a Kohen should do it, and the other ones it doesn't say whether a Kohen should do it or not. Now, the first one, leaning on it, smicha, that is definitely performed by the Yisrael. Shechita comes immediately after that, it doesn't say. So the Gemara says that teaches us that shechita is meant to be performed by Yisrael. We haven't said anything about Kohanim yet at this point. The Gemara says, why would I think that a Kohen has to do shechita? The Gemara brings a Mishnah which says, it learns from the Psukim, Va'atu v'necha itcha tishmu es kunaschem, l'mibeis la'paroiches, v'chol dvar ha'mizbeach. So you may think that everything that has to do with the mizbeach has to be done Kohanim, and therefore we learn from here the fact that shechita comes right after smicha, and smicha is definitely done by Yisrael, that the shechita is also kosher to be done by Yisrael. Now the next thing on the list is zrika, applying the blood, and there it says clearly a Kohen has to do it. Says the Gemara, you should therefore think that everything from zrika and on has to be done by a Kohen. There's nothing else that a Yisrael is allowed to do. However, following the zrika, there are 4 things where the Torah says a Kohen should do it. Why does the Torah specify a Kohen has to do it, each of these 4 things? If I could figure out the fact you said zrika, a Kohen has to do it, everything from zrika and on, these 4 things are extra. So the Gemara says that the point of these 4 things being extra is to teach me that the hefshit and the nituach, the skinning and the cutting up of the animal, that is allowed to be done by a Yisrael. And that would be why the Torah has to come later and tell me, well, these other things have to be done by Kohanim, but something else is allowed to be done by Yisrael. And what is that something else? That's the skinning and the cutting up. And the Gemara wants to know which step, which extra thing that the Torah says Kohen has to do it. Is that teaching me that Yisrael is allowed to do the hefshit and nituach? So the Gemara is going to go through them in order, and the Gemara will end up settling on the last one. But we'll work through it in order and see what it's useful or not. So right after zrika, right after applying the blood, which is the first thing, it says a Kohen has to do that, and we would assume everything else a Kohen has to do. Right after that, it says hefshit and nituach, and it doesn't say who needs to do it. The Gemara says your assumption would be that a Kohen has to do it because it's after zrika. Says the Gemara, but right after that, it says that a Kohen should bring the eish, should bring the fire onto the mizbeach. Why do you have to tell me that a Kohen has to do that? So this is the Gemara's first attempt. The Gemara says the reason why you have to tell me that a Kohen has to do that is because the step before that a Kohen does not have to do. And that's my source, that a Kohen does not have to do hefshit and nituach. Yisrael is allowed to do hefshit and nituach. So the Gemara rejects this. The Gemara says no. Maybe the reason the Torah has to tell me that a Kohen has to bring the fire, even though it comes after zrika and I should know it myself, is because I would think that that a Kohen does not have to bring the fire. And the reason for that is that I would think that only the activities that bring a kapara, that bring atonement through the carbon, those are the only things that a Kohen has to do. And those are blood-related activities. Arranging the fire does not have to be done by a Kohen, I might think, because it's not a blood activity, it's not a kapara activity. Therefore, the fact that the Torah already told me that a Kohen has to do Zrika, and this is after Zrika, is not enough for me to know that a Kohen has to do the arranging of the fire, the setting up of the fire, the lighting of the fire, and I would think that a Kohen does not have to do it. Therefore, the Torah tells me the Kohen has to do it, and this is not extra to teach me that the Hefsher and Nituach is kosher to be done by Yisrael. So Gemara says, okay, you're right. We'll go on to the next thing on the list, which apparently is extra. There's another thing that it says, that the next avodah that's mentioned is bringing 2 blocks of wood, 2 logs to put onto the fire. That it doesn't say a Kohen has to do. But it does go ahead and say, in the thing after that, it says that the pieces should be arranged in the fire. A Kohen has to do that. So Gemara says, now I have my same proof again. Why do you have to tell me this? It's after Zrika. And it's kapara related. So why does the Torah have to tell me this? If Zrika and everything following it has to be done by a Kohen, this is extra. You don't have to tell me that this has to be done by a Kohen. Must be this is the source to tell me only the arranging of the pieces on the fire. Only that has to be done by a Kohen, but the skinning and the cutting up, Hefshet v'Nituach, does not have to be done by a Kohen. So Gemara says, well, how do you know that this is going back on Hefshet and Nituach and telling you that does not have to be done by a Kohen? Maybe it's going on what's immediately before it, and that's the bringing of the 2 logs. Maybe it's saying only this has to be done by a Kohen, but not the previous step, which was the arranging of the logs. That does not have to be done by a Kohen. And this is not available to teach you that Hefshet and Nituach, skinning and cutting up, does not have to be done by a Kohen. So the Gemara tries 2 reasons to say that this can't be teaching me about the wood, the arranging of the wood. First, the Gemara says no. When it tells me, you have an extra phrase teaching me that a Kohen has to do the arranging of the pieces, so what am I going to exclude based on that? I'll say only the arranging of the pieces, which is an intrinsic part of the carbon, only that has to be done, and I'll exclude something else, which is also an intrinsic part of the carbon, meaning I want to exclude something similar. The Torah says the only intrinsic part of the carbon that has to be done by a Kohen is the arranging of the pieces on the fire, as opposed to a different intrinsic part of the avodah, which is cutting it up and skinning it. So the Gemara says, you want to say that the Torah is excluding something which is intrinsic? I have a much. I think that the opposite should be true. The Torah is specifically saying this extra phrase to include something which is similar in the sense that they're both an arranging type of thing. The Torah tells you an extra phrase that the arranging of the pieces has to be done by a Kohen, which is to exclude that a different type of arrangement doesn't have to be done by a Kohen. What arrangement is that? The arranging of the wood. Like we said, it's the arranging of the wood that's being excluded from the requirement that a Kohen should form it. So you're not correct to say that this phrase is to teach me that only the arranging of the pieces has to be done, but not the cutting up. No, it's to teach me only the arranging of the pieces has to be done by a Kohen and not the arranging of the wood. That's much more logical. So the Gemara says, okay, I hear that. I'll be makabel that. But I still feel that you cannot learn that the extra phrase saying that a Kohen has to do the arrangement of the pieces is coming to exclude that a Kohen does not have to do the arranging of the wood. And the reason is because a Kohen does have to do the arranging of the wood. You're wrong. It's a wrong halacha. A Kohen does have to be the one to arrange the wood. And how do I know that? I know that as follows. Later in the next step, the Torah tells me that it's dafka a Kohen who has to bring the pieces to the Mizbeach. From there, we learn that a Kohen has to bring the pieces, but a Kohen doesn't have to bring the wood. The bringing of pieces has to be done by Kohen, but not bringing of the wood. Now, if the Torah has to come and tell me that the bringing of the wood does not have to be done by a Kohen, obviously the arranging of the wood in the fire does have to be done by a Kohen. You can't come and give me a source that the bringing of the wood does not have to be done if even the arranging of the wood does not have to be done by a Kohen. So obviously, therefore, the only way that makes sense is if the arranging of the wood in the fire does have to be done by a Kohen. That being the case, when the Torah says that the arranging of the pieces of meat in the fire has to be done by a Kohen, that extra line is not excluding that the arranging of the wood in the fire doesn't have to be done by a Kohen, because it does have to be done by a Kohen, as I've just proved to you. So Gemara says, no, I agree with that, but this phrase is still not extra. This phrase is needed for something else. The phrase telling me that a Kohen has to arrange the pieces in the fire is not extra to teach you that the Hesed and Nituch doesn't have to be done by Kohen. This phrase is used for something else. It's used to teach me a halacha that you need 6 people to do the job, as we shall see later in the Gemara. It's used to teach me a specific halacha for itself. It's not extra for any reason. So the Gemara therefore goes to the next and final extra phrase where the Torah says that the burning of the parts in the fire, that has to be done specifically by a Kohen. The Gemara says here you have no answer. Why does the Torah have to tell me that a Kohen has to do that? This is coming after the Zrika, and we know that anything that's after Zrika automatically has to be done by a Kohen. It's part of the Kapara. I don't need any... I have no need for the Torah to tell me this. Obviously, the Torah is telling me this to say that only this, but excluding something else. Burning of the pieces has to be done by a Kohen, but not the skinning and the cutting up. The Gemara accepts that as final. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to show what is this halach of the 6 that we said we needed the Torah to tell me that the arranging of the pieces in the fire, that has to be done by a Kohen. We need that specific halacha. What's that for? What is this thing that it's teaching me that we referred to earlier? So the Gemara says it teaches me that you need 6 people to do the avoda of arranging a sheep, a lamb. The carbon tumid that's brought every day requires 6 people to arrange it, to set it up in the fire. And where do you see that? So the Gemara says if you look at the pasuk here describing the arranging of the pieces, it seems to refer to 6 individuals. Where do you see that? Because it says Ve'orchu, and they shall arrange. That's plurals, at least 2 people. Then it says Bnei Aharon, the sons of Aaron, is also plural, is another 2 people. And then it says HaKohanim, the Kohanim is also plural, is another 2 people. So you have 3 plural words. 3 times 2 is 6. It's got to be 6 people. Okay, nice. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. Rav Elazar has a kasha. Rav Nuna reports Rav Elazar had a kasha, that you're telling me that this is to teach me that a carbon tumid lamb has to be done by 6 people? In context here, we're not talking about a carbon tumid lamb. We're talking about somebody who brings a cow. Somebody brings a private carbon oila. There's a cow. This has nothing to do with a carbon tumid. And about, you know what? You know how many people are required to bring the cow? We said already, 24. So this is totally in the wrong context over here. So Rav Elazar answers his own question and he says, yes, but it's referring to the carbon tumid. How do you know? Because the Torah in the same pasuk says you should put it al ha'etzim ashar al ha'esh ashar al ha'mizbeach, on the wood which is on the fire. Which carbon does the Torah specifically talk about wood and fire? An extra phrase talking about wood and fire, that's the carbon tumid. A carbon tumid in the morning, the Torah says just before that, it specifies that you should bring fire and wood. You have the job of bringing fire and the job of arranging the wood. That's in the psukim that describes that. And Rashi points it out because it says Hi ha'oila al maikda al mizbeach, should be on the burning fire, and it says you should put eitzim ba'boiker, you should put wood on the fire. You have extra psukim there saying put on wood, put on fire. That's in the description of the carbon tumid, and therefore this statement, you need 6 kohanim, is also referring to the carbon tumid. Okay, the Gemara now focuses on the halacha of a Yisrael doing the avoda of arranging the wood in the fire. We had said earlier, a chiddush, that has to be done by a Kohen. Yisrael is not allowed to do that. The Gemara discusses this more at length. The Gemara questions whether it's true, and the Gemara tries to find the rule of what has to be done by a Kohen and what does not have to be done by a Kohen. As far as the wood in the fire, there's 2 steps. There's arranging the existing wood in the fire, and then there's adding 2 logs to the fire, which was done every morning. So the Gemara first quotes Rav Asi named Rabbi Yechanan, who says that if a non-Kohen arranges the wood in the fire, it's chayiv misa, it's puzzle, he did an avodah he's not allowed to do, and it has to be undone. He should take it apart and put it back together. Someone asks right away, he should take it apart and put it back together. What did he accomplish? He still is a non-Kohen who did it. He says, no, he should take it apart and somebody else should put it back together. A Kohen should come and arrange it back together the way it's supposed to be. So now the Gemara asks, and tries to discover, is it true that a non-Kohen is not allowed to arrange the wood in the fire? So Gemara says, Rav Zera asks, this avoda is an avoda that's kosher at night. You're allowed to arrange wood in the fire at night. There aren't any avodas that are kosher at night that a Yisrael is not allowed to do. The rule is that nighttime avodos are generally considered less chashav, less important than daytime avodos, and therefore it's only the daytime avodos that have to be done by a Kohen, but a nighttime avoda, a Yisrael should be allowed to do. So Gemara says, that's not true. I'll show you 2 examples of nighttime avodas that Yisrael is not allowed to do. Number 1, arranging the pieces and the fats in the fire. That can be done overnight. And number two, Trumas Hadeshin. You could do it in the morning, early in the morning, before the sun comes up, and that's still the nighttime. So that's not a kasha. It's part of a day avoda. Arranging the pieces in the fire, that's late pieces that were brought during the day that have to be moved around during the fire as they're burning overnight. That's part of the day. It's called a day avoda. And at Trumas Hadeshin, that's the beginning of the next day. That's the arrangement setting the mizbeach up for the next day. Those are called a day avoda. Even though you could do them at night, they're still referred to as a day avoda. And that's why Yisrael is not allowed to do those. But other than that, and even those count as a day avoda. So there are no night avodas that Yisrael is not allowed to do. So how could Rabbi Yochanan come here and tell me that arranging the fire, which is a night avoda, Yisrael is not allowed to do that? Someone says, okay, so we have to reorganize what Rabbi Yochanan said. He wasn't talking about arranging the fire, he was talking about adding two woods to the fire. Adding two woods to the fire, a pasuk specifically says that that's a avoda sayom. The Gemara will question this soon, but there is a pasuk specifically says that that's an avoda sayom. It says, Baboker, it says, Ubir ala kohen eitzim Baboker. Baboker has to be done in the morning. So that's a job, the adding of two logs to the fire, that has to be done during the day, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying, that a non-Kohen is not allowed to do that, and if he will do that, he will be chayiv misa. The Gemara now asks a kasha. Rava asks, one second, you're telling me that arranging the wood in the fire is such a chashuv avodah, it has to be done during the day, and a Yisrael is not allowed to do it. Two conditions that make it very chashuv. If it's so chashuv, it should be distributed by lottery. We know that all the chashuv avodos, which are done during the day, and a Kohen has to be the one to do it, were distributed by lottery. So Gemara says, first of all, it is distributed by lottery. Rava, you missed a brisa. Brisa says clearly that the one who won the lottery and got the privilege to do the Trumas Hadeshin, he is the one who adds the wood to the fire. So it is done by lottery. Second of all, where did you get this idea that you need these two conditions in order to be considered chashuv enough to require a lottery? You don't need those two conditions. The lottery has to be done on things that don't have the two conditions, that it's a day avoda and a Kohen is the only one who's allowed to do it. And I'll prove it to you. The burning of the fats and the pieces, that has to be distributed by lottery, and that's a night avoda. So Gemara says, one second, we just said before that that's not avoda. That's not a night avoda. That's considered to be a day avoda, even though you could do it at night. It's part of the day avoda. It comes at the end of the day, and it's part of the avoda that was done during the day. So Gemara then asks, Trumas Hadeshin? Trumas Hadeshin is a night avoda, and that was distributed by lottery. So Gemara says, listen, we already told you. First of all, we could have said the same answer, as we said earlier, that that's part of the day avoda, but the Gemara says, I have a better answer. Trumas Hadeshin, we already said how that became a lottery. That became a lottery because of an incident that happened where somebody fell off the ramp because they raced up the ramp. So, therefore, that is the special reason why that has a lottery. But Rava could really be right that you need those two conditions in order to require distribution by lottery. The Gemara says, yeah, but what about shchita? Shchita is distributed by lottery, and shchita, a non-Kohen is allowed to do. So obviously you don't need the two conditions that make it very chashuv in order to require a lottery. You have shchita. Someone says, no. Shchita is chashuv in its own right. Even though a non-Kohen is allowed to do it, it's chashuv because it's the beginning. It's the first step in all the avodos. And therefore that's why it requires lottery. The Gemara now asks that what you're saying here is that the organizing of the two logs of wood in the fire, that counts as an avodas hayoim. That has to be something performed during the day. But the kasha is that doesn't appear to be true. The Mishnah in the beginning of the next parak, which we shall see on the next daf, says that they went up to check that that the sun had really risen. They wanted to make sure that it was the sun that was up and not the moon. And they were very careful to make sure that it was really morning and that it wasn't nighttime before they did the shechita of the carbon tamid. They didn't do that before they organized the two logs in the fire. And if you're correct that the two logs have to be put in the fire only during the day, so then they should have checked before they put the logs in the fire. Why did they wait only before the shechita of the carbon tamid? So Gemara says that's not a kasha. The shechita of the carbon tamid, if they messed it up and they did it at night, they have to throw the whole carbon out. You can't undo it. The two logs, if it comes out that they found out that it was really during the night and they thought it was during the day, so they'll take it off and when they put it back on, they can redo it. It's not a problem. And that's why it wasn't such a concern. The Gemara now repeats this entire discussion. Rabbi Yochanan's statement, the kasha on Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara's defense to the kasha, the Gemara's changing of Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara's kasha on Rava based on that, and the Gemara's defense of that. That entire discussion is all repeated in a slightly different version. But the slightly different version makes a lot of it not make sense, and therefore Rashi throws out most of the girsa. He says that this all is just stuck in here because of the first version of this entire discussion, but it's really a mistake. Tosfos defends it. So let's go through it briefly over here. We had seen that Rabbi Yochanan had said that a non-Kohen who organizes the wood and the fire, one of the first avodas that we do, it's even still at nighttime when we do that a non-Kohen who will do that is Chayav Misa. So the Gemara before had asked, how could you say that a non-Kohen is Chayav Misa for doing a night avodah? The Gemara set out to prove that the organizing of the pieces, the Ivarim and Pedarim in the fire, and the Chumas Hadeshin, those are both night avodas, and we know that a non-Kohen who does that is Chayav Misa for that. That's what the Gemara had set out to prove. Now the Gemara here doesn't ask the kasha from the fact that it's a night avodah. The Gemara asks the kasha that it's not the last avodah in the series. We know that the rule is that a non-Kohen who performs an avodah is only Chayav Misa if it's the last avodah in the series. We've seen that a few daf ago. This is not the last avodah in the series. Organizing the wood and the fire is not the last avodah in the series because you still have to organize, you still have to add 2 logs onto the fire afterwards. So Rashi therefore throws out the gears and he says, what are you asking? What are you bringing me a proof from the Ivarim and Pedarim and from the Chumas Hadeshin that those are night avodas? So who cares about night avodas? We didn't say that the Zohar should be allowed to do it because it's a night avodah. We said that the Zohar should be allowed to do it because it's not the last avodah in the series. Tosfos defends it. He says, no, what the Gemara is trying to say is that since it's a night avodah, therefore it's the last avodah in the series. Because the next thing that you're going to do is going to be a day avodah, and therefore that counts as a new series. And what the Gemara is proving from Mevarim and Pedarim and Chumas Hadeshin is that something which is a night avodah, which is followed by a day avodah, which is similar, that doesn't count as being part of the same series. The fact that one's done at the end of the night and one's done at the beginning of the day makes it a new series. And therefore the Gemara sets out to prove that the Mevarim and Pedarim and the Chumas Hadeshin, those are night avodas, and therefore the avodah which immediately precedes the Ivar and Pedarim is considered the last avodah, because that's a day and this is night. And the avodah which comes just before Chumas Hadeshin is a different avodah, and it's the last avodah in the set, because Chumas Hadeshin is considered to be from a new series, is not considered to be part of the old series. That's how he defends it. Either way, the Gemara changes Rav Yochanan's statement again, just like we did before. The Gemara says, no, Rav Yochanan wasn't really talking about organizing the wooden fire, he was talking about adding 2 logs onto the fire. The Gemara says that Rava asks a kasha, like he asked before, that if it's considered to be such a chashav avodah, that it's the last avodah in the series, we say, but if it's such a chashav avodah, so then it should require a lottery. The Gemara says, we know it does require a lottery. It's part of the lottery for the Chumas Hadeshin. The Gemara says, no, here this is a new step. The Gemara says, no, the kasha was that it should get its own lottery. How come it's included in a different lottery? It should have its individual lottery. It's such a chashav avodah, should get a lottery unto itself. That the Gemara says kid amrina, in one word, kid amrina, which we're trying to explain that we didn't want it to have its own lottery, because then the lottery for the Chumas Hadeshin is not chashav enough. The Kohen who wins that won't consider it a chashav thing, and therefore people didn't participate in the lottery. They stayed in bed. So in order to make it a chashav, we added onto the Chumas Hadeshin lottery also the organizing the wood and the fire lottery should be part of that as well. Now the Gemara then moves on and asks the same question that it asked before on Rava. It says that based on what you're saying, that in order for something to deserve its own lottery, it has to be chashav that it's a night avodah. Rashi again throws this out. Rashi again says it's nothing to do with night avodah over here. We're not talking about night avodah. And therefore he rejects his entire discussion. Now the last step in the discussion, Rashi adjusts similar to what Tosfos does. The Gemara there says that this statement of Rav Yochanan seems to be disagreeing with Rav and Levi. Rav and Levi we had a while ago, who said that in order for a non-Kohen to be chayav for doing a certain avodah, it has to be the last avodah in the series, and he did not list putting the wood in the fire as the last avodah in the series. They said that that doesn't count as the last avodah in the series. Rav Yochanan said that it does count. So what's that machlokes? And machlokes obviously is that following putting the wood in the fire, you have to actually put the pieces of the carbon in the fire. So you have to arrange the karbanos in the fire. Rav and Levi consider that part of the same set, and therefore the placing the wood in the fire doesn't count as the last in the series, and therefore it is not something that a non-Kohen is chayav misa if he does that avoda. Rav Yochanan, however, says that it is. So the Gemara now wants to defend that. The Gemara wants to prove Rav Yochanan from the same source that we only checked to make sure that the sun had come up before the shechita. We didn't we didn't check that it was really the sun that was up before we arranged the wood in the fire. Why? Obviously, the arranging the wood in the fire is a night avoda from the night before, and therefore, similar to the way Tosas explained the whole Gemara up till now, obviously it's the last in the series because it could be done at night. And we don't care that it has to be done in the morning. And whatever comes afterwards, the arranging of the pieces of the karbanos in the fire, that's a day avoda, that's called a new series, and therefore this is the end of the old series. This is one support of Yochanan against Rav and Levi, the Rav Yochanan saying that the arranging of the wood on the fire and the putting the logs on counts as a new series. And that the Gemara says not necessarily. Just because we didn't check that we didn't send somebody up on the wall to check that it was for sure the daylight doesn't mean that it's really a night avoda. It really is a day avoda. The reason why we didn't send somebody up to check them is because I could always undo it if I found out that it was wrong, and it was really nighttime. It was really the moon that I thought was the sun. It was the moon that was lighting up the sky. I could redo it, no problem. And therefore, they didn't care to check, but it is a day avoda, and therefore it's not the last avoda in the series, because the avoda that follows afterwards is part of the same thing. You arrange the wood, and then you arrange the pieces in the wood.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.